We are recording. I presume, does everybody have an outline? Oh, no. Minute, you slid in on me, Melinda. Yep.
Uh-oh.
I presume y'all read the email.
No, I think you should go over it.
Wasn't that a fun email? All right, ladies. Okay, but seriously, we're going to kind of jump right in. Tonight, obviously, this topic is always a very controversial topic. And there are a lot of feelings that go into this topic, and I understand that. Okay? I was raised in an environment where I should be on one side of this because of I have felt the abuse of this substance. Okay? So I am going to step away from my experiences from it. I'm also going to step away from all of the facts. You can go and get all the scientific facts. What are the, how many DUIs are in all that kind of stuff. And that needs to be considered. All right? When you are thinking about this topic, all of that stuff needs to be considered. What does it do to your family? What does it do to your mental health? What does it do to all that kind of things, okay? But what we are doing in this class is what does the Bible say about it? Okay? What does the Bible say? So what I'm going to do is probably something that you may have never come across is the Bible actually falls on both sides of the argument. The Bible is for it and it's against it. Okay? And so I'm going to be for it when the Bible's for it, and I'm going to be against it when the Bible's against it. Okay? So let's start off right at the top, and we're going to kind of stick to our outline tonight, because if I start going over here, I'm going to say something that's going to raise a question, and I really want us to stay laser focused. If you do have questions, please ask. If you do have comments, please ask. Okay? But I know there are a lot of anecdotes that go along with this, and a lot of those anecdotes actually need to be considered, right? If you have family history of stuff, the Bible can also be used, hey, I want to drink. You can go find verses that give you full permission to drink. Maybe not in the way you're wanting, but if you want to justify drinking, you can do that. There's a lot of sins you can justify by overlooking other things, okay? You can go to the Bible to prove a lot of things if you don't take it all into consideration. If you're here in the class and you just want to find a verse that condemns it 100%, you can find verses that you can twist to say this 100% condemns it, no questions asked. Well, what about these other verses? Okay, so sometimes because of the way we were raised, right, what we have heard can influence this discussion. And I just want to talk about what the Bible has to say about it, and that's kind of where I want to go. So the Old Testament, there are 3 different Hebrew words for that we are going to consider. There are actually some nuance. There are some words that are used like by themselves, but they really don't go into play with our discussion tonight. Here, Joey. There you go. So there are 3 Hebrew words. The first one is yayin, and I'm going to butcher all of those, okay? If you pronounce it and say, hey, well, my preacher told me this is how it's pronounced, I'm probably wrong, okay? That word is just translated wine, okay? And what you're going to see is that is a fermented alcoholic wine. Now, when you think alcoholic, don't think like the process that we've put it through, to make it more alcoholic. These are a lot of times are natural fermentations, aged wines kind of stuff, things that just, they haven't stopped the process, but they haven't accelerated the process either. Okay, so when you hear alcohol, don't think factory, distillery, adding yeast, and increasing alcohol content, okay? That's what we think. So, but we'll get there. Shakar, okay, is the Hebrew word for strong drink. So there is a yayin for wine. Shakar means strong drink, okay? And strong drink is anything that's not wine that is alcoholic that you've made. So they did have a process of making stronger stuff. And we'll actually see that the Bible talks about them distilling it or purifying it. And then there is turos or tirosh, which is your new wine or sweet wine. Okay, and a lot of times people use that in the sense of it's fresh off the grape. It's still grape juice. It can be. Or it also can be to refer to the wine that was the first drops off harvest. Because a lot of times what you have is what we're going to see right here in Deuteronomy 14, when they actually drank it and when it would have been harvested are months apart. Months apart. It doesn't mean that you literally crushed the grape, squeezed it, put it in a glass, and then, right? Or it's a lot of times it's sweet wine, and they did have a process to keep the sweetness in wine, okay? It didn't really affect the alcohol content so much, but a lot of times that is the word that is used for your unfermented, your non-alcoholic, one that you could probably drink a whole lot of before you ever, got intoxicated, okay? In the New Testament, there are 3 different words. There is oinos, which is the Greek translation of yayin. So when you go into your Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, where yayin was in the Hebrew, oinos is the word that is always in its place. Okay? So there's that word, which is the common word for wine. That's used in if you just want to talk about wine in any way, that could be a word to be talking about it, whether you're talking about fermented or not, but most of the time it's usually your fermented wine. There is Sakera, which is the Greek translated for shakar, strong drink, and then there is glucose. I'm just going to say glucose. It's probably pronounced way differently than that. All right, that is your new wine or literally sweet wine, kind of your translation of turos. Okay, so there's 3 different words. So here's what I'm going to say. All I'm going to say about these words. If the Bible wanted to talk about an unfermented wine, they had a word that would have best described it. So a lot of times people go in, and when it seems to promote it, people are like, oh, look. But obviously it can't be talking about any alcoholic wine. Well, if they wanted that, there was words they could have used and they didn't that would have best communicated that. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to first start off by looking at all of the passages that positively talk about alcohol. And you may think, well, I've never seen one. You probably haven't. There aren't a whole lot. There's actually more than you may consider. Then we're going to look at all of the negatives. Then we're going to look at one that is both positive and negative, which is really where all of this study is going to lead us. Here's another interesting fact. The negative verses, when I say negative, it's speaking against it or warnings. It is about 20 to 1 more negative. There's 273 verses, and I don't have them all on here, that speak of a warning or negative of alcohol. Okay? You've got maybe 10 to 20, depending on how you use the verse, that speak about it in a positive way. So that alone already tells us that, let's say, just give me some grace tonight. Now, let's say the Bible says it's okay to have a drink. It's also going to tell you there are a lot of parameters that you need to consider before you take that first drink. There are a lot of things to consider before you just go, okay, I've got the green light, let's go. There are a lot that you need to put in front of that before you do it. And I am going to even suggest tonight that that is probably more of our aim than this in how we want to conduct our lives. That's going to be my takeaway from a lot of my study. This ought to be more of our mindset, and you'll see why as we get into it. So let's start with the positive, because we don't have much time. Deuteronomy 14, 22 through 26. And yes, we're using the Old Testament because a lot of times people talk about alcohol in a way as if, or fermented wine or wine in any kind of way that has any kind of alcohol or any kind of fermentation as inherently evil. If something is inherently evil or inherently wrong, it would be wrong at all times in any situation. Okay? If it's just inherently wrong. So Deuteronomy 14, we're going to look at this is kind of the feast of the first fruits. This is where you would gather your first fruits and collect your first fruits. So look at 22. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year, and before the Lord your God in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil. Interesting thing enough, in verse 23, he uses the word wine for the stuff you just picked, the new wine, but watch his transition. He's going to go from your sweet wine, new wine, watch what he says to do with it. And of your oil, the firstborn of your herd and flock, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. So your first fruit, when you are tithing back to God and giving back to God, once again, they didn't give in money. They usually gave in, if you were a wine, farmer, wine dresser, you gave of your wine. If you were an animal, you gave of what was basically what you made your money you're living off of. Verse 24, and if the way is too long for you, so that you're not able to carry the tithe, when the Lord your God blesses you because the place is too far from you, which the Lord your God chooses to set his name there, then you shall turn it into money. So you can sell it, turn it into money, bind up the money in your hand, go to the place the Lord your God chooses. Spend the money for whatever you desire, oxen, sheep, or wine. Now, that word wine is the first one, oinos. So he goes from sell your freshly picked for money, and you can go buy, and he uses the general common word.
Is the ESV incorrect then? Because mine says oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink.
I haven't got there yet. I didn't read the rest of it. So oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink. Or your translation may say something, wine or a drink similar to it. And one of the reasons why they do that is because they were uncomfortable with God telling someone to go buy wine and buy strong drink, and watch this. And you shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. All right, whatever your appetite craves. So wine or strong drink, and you shall partake. So Feast of the First Fruits was a time where you could sell and buy, and as you're going to celebrate this feast, you were able to buy wine, strong drink, and drink it, presumably. Okay? So there's just, again, positive aspect. Numbers 28:7, Numbers 15:7, I'm not going to read them, but you could also offer your wine and sprinkle it on the altar of the Lord and offer it to God. You can offer your wine, and the other verse says you can even take your strong drink, and God will accept it as an offering to him. Once again, if strong drink was not a part of something that they partook in, how do they have it to offer it? Are they making it just for that purpose? Okay, so once again, these are verses we have to deal with. Okay? These are verses we have to deal with. Look at Genesis 14:18. All right? And as we get into it, I'm going to add some more stuff, but right now I want to build a case. Okay? Genesis 14:18. So Melchizedek, king of Salem, who is the priest of the Most High God, who is a Christ figure in the Old Testament, when he goes to bless Abraham, what does he bless him with? Bread and wine. That word wine is your oinos, your fermented wine. They would sit, they would drink. Genesis 27:25, when Isaac blesses Jacob, guess what he pulls out to bless him with? They would pull out wine, they would drink it, and he would bless him. So at times of blessings, wine was used during these occasions. Okay? Okay. Psalm 104:15. Psalm 104:15. This one may make us a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. That's my job, is to make you a little uncomfortable. Psalm 104. Someone read verse 15. Actually, read 14 and 15.
Cause the grass to grow for the livestock, and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart.
Okay. So this Psalm 104 is actually a psalm of the psalmist recounting all the ways God blesses people and his people. And he finished this list off with, you give wine to gladden the heart of man, or literally to make man's heart merry. He not only talks about the substance, he also talks about its effect. To gladden one's heart. If you were to take a wild guess at what wine and gladdening the heart have to do with each other, what would be your guess? Well, okay, celebration.
I don't know, like, we're doing this diet, right? And we're not allowed to have Coke. I love Coke. So on my cheat day, I get to have Coke. It is a celebration.
It hasn't like lost its taste yet to you? Oh my. Okay, well, most will tell you, almost everyone that I read, say this is talking about the effect of the drink that it is having on your body, more so than just, oh, I get wine, and now I'm happy because of it. It is what makes you happy. Now, so there is an aspect of wine that can help cause joy. Some people use it for lowering of anxiety, and that, once again, this was a legitimate use, and you read some Jewish sources that used it for that. Okay? Now, let's keep going. Let's keep going. Keep to the outline. Look, we're going to get to the negative soon, okay? So don't be like, oh man, I'm going to make everybody uncomfortable on the other side too. Don't worry.
You know where we're going after church tonight.
Proverbs 3:10. Someone read Proverbs 3:10. Proverbs 3:10. Start in verse 9.
Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine.
Okay, so once again, this is a second verse that talks about this is a blessing from God. Now, is God going to give your vats bursting with wine and then expect you to just kind of let it go bad? Is that okay? So just this is talked about as a blessing from God. And you can look at, speaking of the science of it, if you want to go there are health benefits to grape juice and wine. All right, that is natural remedies for a lot of things. Okay? Let's keep going. Proverbs 9, 1 through 6. Okay, I'll just read this. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the high places in town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed. Now, this is a metaphor. This is symbolism. But would God be using something that is inherently evil and showing it and using it as a symbol of something that, like wisdom, when you gain wisdom, it's saying as if you are full of bread and wine. It is a blessing to be full of wisdom is to be a blessing. So he's using a symbolism that also would relate to blessing. In the Bible, as we've already established, bread, oil, and wine are used, and I'm not using all of them, by the way, are used over and over and over and over again as this is a blessing from God. And it is not using, and I avoided all of the translations because there are times where God says he gave them new wine or sweet wine. I avoided those. I didn't even bring them in because, you could say, well, that's non-fermented. This word that is being used is not really disputed besides the people who are going into the Bible and saying, well, why is that word unfermented? Well, because I don't believe God would ever let us drink, therefore. But all of our history and all of our study of that word being used in other places show that it is a fermented word. Okay, it is a word. Now, what level? What proof? It doesn't go there. Once again, right? We can turn this blessing into a curse for us by making it more than what God intended it to be. Okay? All right? Now, you haven't even... let's just keep going. Next! Isaiah 25:6. I know, I'm trying to stick to my outline. It's only a matter of time. Yeah, that's true. Okay.
Nobody's disagreed yet.
If looks could talk, I think people... Okay, this is a prophecy that is used of the Messianic age, or an age where God is going to restore his people and bring them back into the land and rebuild his kingdom. And on this mountain, it says, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine. That word is actually a word we haven't looked at yet. It's shamir, and well-fried is zakak. It's probably a bad translation of it. Distilled, refined, or purified, but it is well-aged. It is wine that they have allowed to age, okay? And they have kept it in a place where it is pure wine. And yet, God is saying that this kingdom, when he restores them, it's going to be like well-aged wine. All I'm saying is if wine is inherently evil and bad, and don't put it on your lips ever, how can God use it in a source of this is what it will be like? If they're like, well, that's a sin for us, do you understand what I'm saying? You see where I'm going? Okay. Amos 9:14. Let's go to Amos 9, verse 14. And once we go through all the negatives, you can raise your hand and you can ask questions. Let's get them all out. Someone read Amos 9, verse 14. This is definitely a messianic prophecy. This is definitely a time when Jesus was going to come. Amos chapter 9, the restoration of Israel. But look at verse 14.
I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they shall make gardens eat their fruit.
Okay. So in Isaiah and Micah and Amos, and I didn't bring them all up, there's at least 7 verses that talk about the restoration of Israel in the Messianic age coming announced with new wine. So when you go to John 2, and John uses that as his first miracle, it's not a discussion about is Jesus making people drunk or not. It's literally a discussion of Jesus showing a sign that he is entering the Messianic age into start, right? And John uses this as his first sign. Why does he use, making people drunk? He's not, okay? And what you need to understand about Jewish feasts, does anyone know how long a Jewish wedding would last? We're talking 5 to 7 days, depending on how much money you had. Weddings lasted for days. So when wine runs out, we're not talking about one night, wine running out, and then Jesus going around filling everyone's cups after they've emptied the vats, and him just going and pouring more in your cup. Okay? But what we are talking about, and what the master of the feast recognizes, is normally people use the good wine last, because after they've had so much of it, they don't care what kind of wine they have. What effect do you think he's talking about? If good wine is non-alcoholic, then, like grape juice doesn't change. It doesn't make you go, oh, I don't care if this grape juice is all sour now. There's a difference in feeling its effect, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about, and being drunk. Because the Bible is 100% against being drunk. 100%. Okay? And we're going to talk about that as we get into some of our negatives. But what Jesus did make is he made oinos, which is the Greek word for yayin, and which is the translation in the Old Testament. It is a fermented wine. And the master of the feast recognized that Jesus made a good wine, the first wine you would normally bring out, and it would have been fermented. Okay? There's a Greek word that he could have used if he wanted like sweet wine, non-fermented sweet wine. There's a word for that. John doesn't use that word. Okay? That's glucose. That's all. I'm sure it's pronounced other ways, but it's glucose for our purposes. Okay? And it's interesting because he says when people have drunk, he uses the word for methuo, which is in the process of getting drunk. It doesn't mean they are drunk. He's talking about they are drinking something that if they keep drinking will eventually get them drunk. Jesus never intended to get people drunk, but the good wine is meant to get people. That's your normal feast. It doesn't mean that's how Jesus used it, but the master of the wine is saying, all the feasts that I've done, this good wine is meant to get people to a place where they don't care what they're served. Okay? And that's what Jesus served, but he probably served it on the last day of the feast when they had none. So it's as if they're drinking the good wine first. And there's actually some symbolism in it being last as well. Because the Messianic age is your last age, and people wonder, God saved the best for last. And Jesus, being the Messiah, being the prophet, priest, king, he's the best. So John 2, I don't really like to have a discussion on alcohol about John 2 because that's not the reason why John talked about that entire scene. We miss the Messianic implications when we go, did he make him drunk or not? First, Jesus says that I'm going to send people to hell for drunkenness. So I can't go and use John 2 at all and say, Jesus made them drunk. Because then he's sending, he says I send people to hell for being drunk. Okay? Got me there? All right. Isaiah 1, 21 through 24. I'm not going to read it because I want to get into some of our negative passages and I want to open up some questions. But a lot of people use the excuse that they water down their wine. Now, here's what I researched and researched and researched. Watering down of wine is used in Isaiah over and over and over again as a sign of something that is bad. God tells Israel, you are like watered down wine that I hate and can't stand. And it's used in a negative. And what people do is they take a Roman source, first century Roman source, and say, the Romans, they would have watered down their wine, 2 parts water, 1 part wine. We've got Jewish sources that actually combat that say, us Jews, we don't do that. That would be an abomination to basically take what God has blessed us with and water it down. This was good when God gave it to us. Making it anything other than that would actually ruin God's blessing rather than make it better. Okay? But once again, we don't live back there. It's very hard to take, well, what Jewish source? Well, at what time was this written? It can be very hard to figure all that stuff out. So I really want to stick with what does the Bible say, but I know people talk about that. So I wanted to bring this point up that the Bible, the Old Testament, uses watered down wine in a negative sense, not in like a good, go do that. All right. So, now Proverbs 31, 6 through 7. Proverbs 31, this is going to be really everyone's heard the 1 Timothy 5:23. Right? Put a little water or put a little wine. Actually, he's talking about put a little wine in your water. And one of the reasons why they would have done that is when you're traveling, have you ever had different water at different places? And it messes your stomach up or messes you up? Now, we all can buy bottled distilled water, so we basically make it the same. But if you go to other countries, a little wine actually helps kill bacteria and all that kind of stuff. And Timothy was obviously having some stomach issues but Timothy was against it for some reason. That's why Paul had to say and try to convince him, hey, add a little, it's okay, Timothy. And one of the reasons why Timothy would have needed that is because what you're going to see, one of the negatives, leaders, elders, deacons, kings, priests, it was a no-go, or a very limited, you be careful, right? And we'll get there as we get to the negative. So Timothy obviously saw himself as a leader who's going to be preaching the Word of God. What can alcohol do? Do you want that influencing you when you're doing the Lord's Word? No. But he had to be convinced by Paul, it's this moment, just do it, it's okay, it'll help your stomach, put it in your water, go read it. He's telling him to put it in his water, so it helps it. All right, someone read Proverbs 31, 6 through 7. We're going to come back to Proverbs later, but read Proverbs 31, 6 through 7. Okay, someone who's dying. When my grandmother was dying, they gave her morphine. And let me tell you, when I saw her before they gave her morphine, I would have done anything, given her anything to help her ease those last couple hours. They didn't have morphine. You know what they had? They had strong drink. Essentially what he's saying, someone at the end of their life, they're dying, they're in pain, they're suffering. Let them go out as best and as comfortable as they can. Okay? It's okay. Let them forget their worries. You know, because at the end of life, you'll start asking just knock them out. I mean, that's essentially what they do. Now, even before medicines, when they were doing major surgeries, guess what they had people do? Right? Get them drunk so they're not feeling, stitches or whatever. And that's circumstantial. That is a positive use of it. Can that be abused? 100% absolutely. Because people go, oh, look, I can do that. Now I can do it any other time. All right, so those are all the positives that I'm going to bring up. The other ones talk about the other word that are more sweet wine, but there are more verses that talk about this being a blessing from God. Anyone have any questions so far? Stella, go ahead.
Well, you just said in Timothy it said to mix the water with wine. They said to do it. But then up here you said, in Isaiah it says water down wine was a negative thing. So
yeah, on a normal basis. But what Timothy's doing is he's trying to drink water and not drink wine. He's not using it as a blessing from God. But their water was bad. I mean, you don't have...
was it negative that way?
No.
Because it was kind of like
Two different circumstances. Yeah, I think two different circumstances.
Okay.
But he's saying he's not watering down the wine. He's adding wine to the water to make the water be able to go down. See, it's not taking the wine and say, add some water to the wine and water that down. He's saying just put a little wine in the water to make it where you can drink it and not tear you up. Okay? Okay, so a lot of people who want the permission to drink would probably love for me to stop there. You can't even make that stuff up. Well, I got 5 minutes, right? Okay. So, all right, question.
No, I'm just kidding.
Any other questions? Serious. Did anyone even know the Bible had positive things to say about wine and alcohol? Okay, all right. I knew some of them, but as I looked, I was like, what really? What really? God's go buy wine and strong drink and drink it, whatever you have. That was a weird verse for me to read with the way I grew up. Okay, it was a very strange, Deuteronomy 14 was a very strange verse for me to read. Because I assumed it was just, anyway, all right. Proverbs 21. This is the one we know. Wine is a what? It's a mocker. Strong drink, a brawler, and whoever's led astray is not wise. Don't be fooled for a moment that just because something is okay, that it cannot absolutely ruin your life. That it cannot absolutely... So the mocker is to scorn, to talk arrogantly, to boast, to be inflated, and to be a shower of oneself. So how do you know when you've gone too far? It's making you feel a little too much like Superman. You start going, and I'm going to be honest, as we're going to read, you're going to understand that you're not the person to be able to tell, well, I haven't had enough and I'm good. It's actually evidenced by what other people see around you, and you need to trust that people are going, well, I'm good. I've only had 3. I've only had 2. I've only had whatever. No. You've had enough. You're not who you were before the 3 or before the 2 or before the 17, whatever you're on. Don't get the 17, please. Brawler. The word brawler is to be in a stir, to be boisterous, to growl, to rage, to be in a commotion. It makes you get into fights or to get into arguments or to do things that if it's changing you or if it's taking the worst parts of you and making them highlighted, it's not for you. It's not for you. He's not saying when you've got to that point. He's saying if wine is a mocker, do not let it lead you astray. So that verse alone, all the positive verses in the world can go, you know what, I have permission, but you had better think long and hard about what is this doing to me, my family, my mind, my decision makings when I'm doing it. Okay, so that's a pretty strong warning. You better check yourself. Okay, you better check yourself. Proverbs 21:7, he who loves wine and oil will not be rich. If your credit card ever allows you to search, how much money have I spent on this year? And you realize you could have bought a second mortgage, a second house. All right? It's not going to help you. It can lead you down a path where it's not a blessing anymore. It's now causing you to spend money you don't have. Or maybe you do have, but it was meant for other things. Okay? This goes beyond enjoyment, but you love it. This idea of love is you can't give it up. You're loving this stuff, and it's mine, and no one's going to tell me I can't have it. That's going too far. You have become led astray by it. All right, we're going to stop there. We'll pick it up. I guess we're going to do